good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owner of the Macquarie University land, not Macquarie University land, of course, University of Tasmania land. Too familiar with that. I've been saying that again and again, but I noticed that nobody else has done this apart from the minister. So I think I should really sincerely pay my respect to the people. I think the Palawa people here for their traditional custodian of this land, and also put my sincere respect to the elders, past, present, and future generation. This is a very emotional workshop for me. I would like to thank Dr. Tony Press for his invitation, also for RUSI to have me, because this is kind of like my goodbye conference to Australia. I first came to Tasmania in 2014 when I was still based in Scotland. You can imagine traveling all those long distance from Scotland, the sunshine capital of Scotland, Dundee, to Tasmania, and then you feel like, oh, the weather seems to be very similar. and then I moved to then after that I did move to Australia. And in 2016, when I first moved to Australia, my first research trip was to Hobart as well. I was here to attend Kamala. I wasn't allowed to attend inside the meeting rooms, but what happened? I guess not surprising, because Hobart is a small city. I bumped into a Chinese delegation to Kamala in the Mid-City Hotel. So that's pretty much the starting point of my Antarctica research here in Australia. And since then, I've been visiting this city regularly every year. Every time it's just enriching experience. I met and made good friends, colleagues, and basically, I really appreciate this land and also its generous and kind people. So I have already stepped down from the director of the Center for Environmental Law at Macquarie, and will move to Singapore in the next 2 weeks for my next chapter of my career. But just be rest assured, Tassie people, wherever I will be in my chapters of careers, I think I can proudly to self-claim myself as a friend of Tasmania. So I guess nobody would be against that, you know? I'm going to be a self-claimed friend of Tasmania forever. So that's kind of my thank you note for this before I get started. All right, now right into the business. I must tell you, I was very pessimistic. I was very pessimistic about the future of this world. I have lived and experienced over the past 5, 6, 7 years since my move to Australia. Well, a very fruitful, although occasionally bumpy, academic career. But I have lived and experienced all these crises that we are all facing together in the world: the climate crisis, the biodiversity loss crisis, the mass extinction, the vortex decay of the Australia-China relations, the US-China rivalry over the past years. You know, I was very pessimistic, and this kind of feeling or emotion reached its top high when the Russian invasion of Ukraine broke out. But then I become actually calmed down. So I'm not that pessimistic anymore. I'm becoming very calm about the future of our world and human beings. I will tell you why and how did I achieve that at the end of my presentation. So that's a hook, you know. It's kind of like, you know, a self therapy process to try to reconcile myself and this kind of problematic world by doing some research. So that's kind of where we are. The Russian invasion, the Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine is very bad. No doubt about the serious consequence of this war, even though we are here down in Tasmania. So this is what I'm telling my my undergraduate student in my international law class every semester. In week 10, we talk about use of force. And you know, the human beings had 2 bloody world wars in the first half of the 20th century. And that's where people came together in 1945 at UN Plaza in San Francisco and reached out to this UN charter. In its preamble, that's the lesson that we learned. That is, we, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. So pretty much, if you don't know international law, now is the opportunity. That is, this contemporary public international law, underpinned by the UN Charter, pretty much provides a blanket prohibition of the use of force for whatever reason. For whatever reason. The starting point is don't do it. If you have to do it, you must have legitimate reasons. There are very limited exceptions that countries can use force. One is self-defense, of course, and second one is the authorization by the UN Security Council. That's why this war has significant implications and consequences for this world that we are living in under whatever you call it, rules-based international order or UN-centered international law. This is a very problematic move. Well, but this is not the first one, let me remind you, because in 2003, when US invaded Iraq, there was no UN security authorization either. So, but now we're talking about Russian invasion in Ukraine. So that's fundamentally problematic. So, but the thing is, when it comes to the Arctic and Antarctica, yes, because you see this war is fundamentally problematic. Arctic and Antarctica are not immune from it. They are not immune from it, even though they are far away. There are less people there. Like in Antarctica, there is no permanent inhabitants there. It doesn't really matter. So they are not immune from either a fundamental challenge to the international system or climate change. They are not immune from it. That's what our starting point. So, but there are very significant differences between the Arctic and Antarctica. As you can see, here is a map of the Arctic. Most parts of the Arctic fall into national jurisdiction. So there are 8 Arctic states that have clear, undisputable, they just solved their last island dispute recently between Canada and Denmark, I think last week. They're undisputable national jurisdiction in that part of the world. There is only a very small portion of the Arctic Ocean around the North Pole that is called the Central Arctic Ocean. That is the high sea. That is the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And recently, a fisheries treaty was concluded between Arctic states and those fishing states like China, Japan, South Korea, and so on. So Arctic has countries, and Arctic has a lot of people. And so the stake there is significantly higher, I think, than the Antarctic. So here is the governance regime for that region. So Arctic is essentially an ocean. It is ice covered, but now ice is fast melting because of climate change. So it is essentially an ocean. So because it's an ocean, the international law, especially international law of the sea, applies, such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And because most parts of the Arctic falls into national jurisdiction, global conventions such as Convention on Biological Diversity, because it applies to national jurisdictions, also applies there. So you do have international law directly apply in the Arctic as other part of the world. And then at the regional level, the most important cooperation forum is the Arctic Council. So all the 8 Arctic states, so those countries who have territory within the Arctic Circle, they kind of establish this collaborative, cooperative framework, and they are the only ones who have voting rights to make decisions. There are also observers like China, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, India. They are only observers, so they can go and attend those conferences, workshops, working groups, but they have no rights, no voting rights to decide anything regarding the Arctic. So then the Arctic Council deals with fisheries, shipping, oil and gas, mammals, tourism, land-based pollution, deep seabed activities, and so on and so on. So all these human activities, while intertwined with the relevant international treaties and conventions regulating those human activities, because Arctic is is essentially an ocean and falling into national jurisdiction. Well, Antarctica is actually quite different, because Antarctica, there are territorial claims over Antarctica, and there is this very robust, resilient, and I mean, I pretty much think that it's a kind of a genius invention about this Antarctic Treaty to kind of taking a bifocalism approach, freezing the territorial claim, they devote the whole continent and its adjacent waters to peace and science. So the systems are very different. The systems are very different. But different systems, same players. So this is once again not immune. That's why Arctic and Antarctica are not immune. And because there are the same players in the Arctic and Antarctica, that's why what happens in the Arctic have lessons, or you call it influence, whatever you call it, have influence on Antarctica. And that's what we are going to talk a little bit more today. So this Arctic cooperation, the Arctic Council, a very peaceful, collaborative regional forum for Arctic affairs, actually was very young. It is much younger than the Antarctic Treaty, because the Antarctic Treaty was concluded in pretty much the climax of the Cold War between United States and Soviet Union. Once again, that's the player. But in the Arctic, same story. Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987 delivered a speech in Murmansk, the Russian gateway to the Arctic, and proposed to the world, especially to the North, that let the north of the globe become zone of peace, and also let the North Pole be a pole of peace. And Gorbachev, it is Mikhail Gorbachev who made this suggestion that all interested states start talks on the limitation and scaling down of military activities in the North as a whole. Because before that, the military confrontation was actually quite, the tension was actually quite high. I mean, NATO is not far from Russia, with Norway as a member of the NATO. So anyway, the political situation changed. The Soviet Union collapsed. Russia came into play. 1991, you see, when the political tension became low, 1991, the 8 Arctic countries agreed on this Arctic environmental protection strategy. 1996, Arctic Council was established until 2014. But even in 2014, when Russia illegally annexed the Crimea from Ukraine, in those days, I was still in Europe, so I was actually involved in drafting the EU's 2016 Arctic policy, because that's part of my kind of Marie Curie fellowship funded by the European Union. And I still heard about those words saying, oh, yeah, so Arctic is exceptional. Arctic, so even those days, the Arctic cooperation between Russia and the US are still going on. But see, that's why you can see the Ukraine war, why it is so serious. It is so fundamental, because now it is a different world. I can say that because on the 24th of February 2022, when the Ukraine war broke out, there finally, in all these years, the Arctic Council's work is paused. So 7 other Arctic states, US, Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Finland, Sweden, they all just, and Norway, they all just say, sorry, I don't want to engage with Russia anymore. We stopped working. So all the official meetings, and by the way, so Arctic Council has this rotary chairmanship. So every 2 years, one Arctic state will come in to play as the chair of the Arctic Council. They don't really have a permanent kind of chairmanship. They do have a permanent secretariat, which is based in Tromsø, Norway. So it is now under the Russian chairmanship, and then this Arctic Council collaboration now has completely gone into silence. So, which is very serious. So anyway, here it comes. Here it comes that we have 2 different systems in the poles, but same players in the poles. They all fall into this global narrative, which is very much promoted by the United States of America and also, of course, Australia, this rules-based international order. Well, you are more familiar with this term than me, right? But I do have a large number of questions on this term, so I'll just share some of my views here. And the first thing is, I have no bad feelings about this term, unlike the Chinese government. I don't really have any bad feelings with this term, because in my view, in my academic view, this term is neutral. This is a neutral term. So it is very much depending who is talking about that. I was on my way to Sydney Airport yesterday, 5 o'clock. Traffic crazy. So I was stuck in a Uber with a Turkish driver, and he was pretty much trying to brainwash me in a way. Like in 50 minutes, the Ottoman Empire brought the peace to the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was a great kind of legacy, and Turkey should follow in the future. But indeed, if you ask the emperor of the Ottoman Empire, what is a rules-based order? He will tell you, come to Istanbul. We are the center of the rules-based order. So China or Russia or India, any country, once you become the most powerful ones, you can use this term, because this term is very convenient. That's why I think that where my critique comes in is like, all right, it's very convenient for powerful countries to blame others. Whoa, it's all about rules, because rules comes first, right? It's all about rules. Oh, you are the rule taker, you are the rule maker, you are the rule breaker. Oh, it's all about rules. That's what I came here every year when I face questions, even though I'm an Australian academic. But people ask me questions like, whoa, is China going to break the Antarctic Treaty System, the rules, the military use? That's the rules, right? But rules are the tools. Rules are there to blame. What is hidden in this term is this order. But order has a power structure. Whose order are we talking about? So that is kind of where I come in, and I feel like this term can be critiqued. And also, even when it comes to rules, because I'm international lawyers, I think also one critique comes in is like, all right, you have rules, but rules are not static. So it's not like you have rules here and just say, we have set the rules. Come and play. Yeah, you are following the rules. You're not following the rules. But rules are also dynamic. Rules are being developed. For example, I just said, in the Central Arctic Ocean, there was no fisheries agreement before last year. And now there is a new fisheries agreement regulating the fisheries. Why? Because it used to be ice covered. There was no commercial fishing opportunities there. Now the ice is melting and the ocean is widening up, and then there might be fisheries there. So then you need agreements. So that's about the rule development. So here comes also why I think explain, at least to me, why there are some kind of anxieties, concerns, and also kind of the fears, suspicions, whatever you call it, about other powers. Other powers can come into play with their power in this order to try to make rules that we are not comfortable with, right? So let's here it comes. So that's kind of what I use this kind of a term, which I figure out what exactly is the problem about all these things going on. So now, after the Ukraine war, is the rule-based order collapsing? I would say partly so, because the thing is, whatever you call the rules-based order or international law, the prohibition of the use of force is fundamental. So if you are challenging that fundamental principle of our human coexistence, that comes a big problem. So that's why it's partly collapsing. And I think what countries responded, I mean, especially the Western countries and Australia's responses are legitimate and very, very clear. And that is good, and that is important. But on the other hand, I would also say, as you will discover later, that I still think that we, as a whole international community, people here in Tasmania or in Scotland or in China, people are resilient. So there are old rules, there can be new rules as well. So that's kind of like what I'm not going to be too pessimistic about this kind of a collapsing of the rules-based international order. But there are significant implications and also lessons from the Arctic to Antarctica after Ukraine war. The first one is of course, it comes to the security and the military. And immediately after the broke out of the Ukraine war, Sweden and Finland submitted their application to join the NATO. And then, I don't know if you are familiar with Finland, because I've been working with University of Lapland for years. Finns are very interesting people. So there is even a term in political science called Finishalization, because they had war with Russia in the 1930s. They lost, but they maintained their independence and sovereignty. So ever since then, the Finns has been trying to play a very difficult game, and they played very well. That is called, they are always prepared. They're always prepared, but they never upset Russia. So that is kind of the fundamental Finnish foreign policy over the past, let's say, 50 or 60 years. That has changed. That has changed. And also, both Finland and Sweden are Arctic Council member states. So they have voting rights because they are both Arctic states. They have territory in the Arctic. So they can vote in the Arctic Council. So, I mean, this is very significant because now, sadly, in the Arctic, we can say that the region has become very confrontational. It used to be cooperative. Cooperation is always a slogan, but not just a slogan, but also, it's always kind of the key in people's mind. It's like, yeah, let's collaborate. Arctic facing climate change, stress, it's very serious. Now it's 7 against 1. It's very confrontational. It's understandable, of course. If you are Finns, I perfectly understand them. So, but the thing is, once you have two camps, things will become very murky. As you will see, I will come back to the sanctions point. But even for now, let's first discuss the implications regarding the science and diplomacy. So now it's like pretty much there is this kind of Russian mass workout. This is the mass workout during the UN Security Council. I think General Assembly meeting in February when the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs delivered a speech. So I mean, this mass workout, or what you can also call the Russian exclusion, is happening. It's happening. So like all those scientific projects between Russia and other Arctic states in the Arctic now are paused. Some very important climate change research cannot go on because now security is everything. Security is everything. So at this moment, I do not challenge that. I do not at this moment. I mean, when the war is going on, I do not challenge that. Security is everything. But I would like to ask you as well: is security everything? Because I think I have experienced when everything is being securitized, life is going to be very tough, and it's sometimes not necessary. So that's the kind of what's going on in the science kind of and diplomacy field. So this Russian exclusion is happening in the Arctic. But I would say this Russian or Chinese exclusion in the Antarctica is actually already going on for years. It's just to less degree. It's to less degree. So of course, it's Russia. It's Putin who started the war. That's why now it's just a very clear cut this Russian inclusion. But I think in down here to the south, we can also see that Russian Chinese inclusion is going on, but not to that extent, not to that extent yet. But what would be the consequence of this exclusion, especially when it comes to Antarctica, because in Antarctica, which is very different from the Arctic in a way that, if we compare Arctic and Antarctica, so here are China's major interests in the Arctic: shorter shipping lanes, the fisheries interest, and also the oil and gas, LNG, the Yamana project. So all this, because Russia has the longest coastline in the Arctic, and also the northern sea route along Russia's coastline is also the most kind of a commercially viable one in the Arctic. So I think China's kind of a politically close to Russia in the Arctic benefits China a lot, because not whether it is the shorter shipping lane or the potential commercial fisheries opportunities, because also the commercial fisheries opportunities, as predicted by scientists, could also possibly first happen in the Russian side of the Central Arctic Ocean, and also not to mention the natural resources and oil and gas. So China in the Arctic has no other choice, and they have a very convenient choice. Let's see Russia. because I mean everything is there. And so we a colleague, a Polish colleague of mine, he's based in Norway. He speaks Russian fluently because he has a Russian wife. We recently, we are going to publish a paper on the Leiden Journal of International Law, and we compared like China's Polar Silk Road and also Russia's regulation of Northern Sea route. Our conclusion is actually, you know, yeah, the Russian regulation of Northern Sea route and Chinese kind of domestic practice when it comes to regulating of the foreign vessels, they're not that different. So they are very similar. But the thing is, with this kind of Russia-China getting close in the Arctic, when China wants to use the Northern Sea route, they don't need to challenge Russia on the rules because that won't change. What they can, because when you challenge the rules, say we want freedom navigation in the Northern Sea route, that is the tool. That is not the aim. The aim is to use the commercial use of the Northern Sea route. So what we come to conclusion is, yeah, I mean, when these two countries getting together, actually China doesn't need to openly challenge Russia about its regulation of the Northern Sea route. Rather, it can be done kind of under the table. It can be done by eroding the order rather than the law to facilitate the Chinese use of the Arctic shipping routes. So I mean, but the thing is, China. My point is, China in the Arctic is a very convenient. Russia is a very convenient choice. But when it comes to Antarctica, it's not necessarily so. It's not necessarily so. And Antarctica settings are so different. But of course, we see this year in the Kamala meeting. Of course, if you have finally, I attended the Kamala meeting last year online, and I have seen that. I had this jaw-dropping experience, like how tense it became, and how the two camps are actually forging. But my point here is that is not necessary in Antarctica, because in Antarctica, China has different choices. China's now stopped calling the Chinese icebreaker now stop calling at Hobart, but they can go to Canterbury, and they may also potentially use the Latin American ports. You know, so my key point here is collaboration maintains the peace. And if we are still trying to hold the Antarctic Treaty System, if you still want the peace, to push the two camps inside a resilient system is not a good idea. It's not a good idea because in the Arctic, unfortunately, it's already there, right? It's already there. I mean, that's understandable. But in the Antarctic, not officially yet. So we still have opportunity to not make that happen. We don't need to have two camps, because once you have two camps, clear cut, that is the true problem of the Antarctic Treaty System. And I do hope that won't happen, because but that is now going on in Kamala regarding the Southern Ocean MPAs. But once again, that is just a minor interest. You know, it's not a significant interest of China's distant water fishing interest. But that is just the starting point of these two camps. And also, I can share with you my own experience early this year. I went to New York and I observed the high seas negotiation, the BBNJ negotiation at the UN headquarters. I can tell you, when China have friends, they behave very differently, because in the UN system, you have the African group, you have Caribbean group, you have the European Union, you have the US, you have Holy See, you name it. You know, there are different camps, not just two camps. There is an ecosystem. So there, I was very surprised, because I first attended the Kamala meeting last year, and then it's my first trip after pandemic to New York to attend this UN meeting. I was very pessimistic. But then when I went there, I suddenly realized, oh, the atmosphere was really good. And China was very much aligning with the Group of 77. And I haven't heard about this term for a long time, you know, the Group of 77, this developing countries camp. So my point here is, once again, what we really need to work on is to not forge two divided camps. What we need to work on is to try to kind of maintain a robust system with different groups, different interests. They just engage with this platform, talk, solve their problem, keep the Antarctica alone. I think that's the best choice. Well, whether we can do it or not, that's a different question. And I can't just give you the full answer here, but at least that's my point. All right, now it's my time to, I think I have almost used up my time. Now this is my secret therapy, why I become not very pessimistic about the future of the world. So over the past 2 months, I've been diving into the archives, the digital archives of the third United Nations conference on the law of the sea, the UNCLOS negotiation 40 years ago, because this year is the UNCLOS, the 40 years anniversary of the adoption of this great convention. But it took 9 years. It took 9 years between 1973 and 1982, with 160 countries participated, 11 sessions, hundreds, thousands of meetings. So I've been diving into the archives to trace what China said in those meetings, in those days. And I was so amused by all these things going on, because I mean, if we are pessimistic about the future, that people say, oh yeah, the world has changed, China has changed. Oh, we haven't changed, China has changed. Oh my God, I tell you, even for adopting this convention for those 9 years time, every meeting there is a new government. And then you have someone passed away, and then they all just spend 5 minutes mourning to the passed away of the one president of a country, and then the countries just can blame each other. And also you see those days. You see those days. So now we are talking about China and Russia, right? China and Russia. Don't forget, it's only 40 years ago. See how China called Russia. This is I recorded from the digital archive in the second session of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea negotiation. China said, the Soviet Union is a so-called hegemon under socialist banner. And the delegation he had mentioned so the delegation he had mentioned, so this is the Chinese delegate's words. The delegation he had mentioned is actually the Soviet delegation. So pretty much like this, so China was seeking to make itself the leader of the third world. And also China will never be a superpower and will never be. And then this said delegation, so they cannot even call Soviet Union its name. So in those days, how bad the relations are. The said delegation had tried to sow the seeds of discord, but it would never achieve its design. So if you just look back, even since the 1945, you will see that it's like this. So once I figured out, wow, it's actually, I mean, the world has changed. We have some difficult times, but it's ever changing. So that's why I'm moving to Singapore, and I'm not that pessimistic anymore, So the world is ever changing. Let's just embrace that. But let's try to find something to work on. And here is to maintain the stability and the resilience of the Antarctica treaty system. And I hope we don't do it wrong. That's my key message. Thank you.
Dr. Mark Harrison is going to give us some thoughts, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak this afternoon. Thanks to Nengye for your wide-ranging presentation. So Nengye has offered an interesting intervention in polar politics through the developing Russia-China relationship, which is expressed in both the Arctic and the Antarctic. This brings forward some of the foundational elements of the post-World War II international order, which I think Nengye was leaning on quite heavily. On the one hand, we can see the future of the polar regions. Rather, we can see in the future of the polar regions a liberal vision of a world moving forward as an international community, advancing science and international cooperation. On the other side, we can see a realist vision of states competing for national power in an anarchical system over resources, prestige, and military dominance. So a lot of our debates over the future of Antarctica often resolve into these different judgments about the international system and our commitment to it and the way we understand that system. So for China and its interest in Antarctica, these questions are especially acute. As on the one hand, as Nengye has suggested, there are lessons from Arctic governance that both can and cannot be applied to the Antarctic and vice versa. And this offers an analytical lever for understanding the specific features of governance systems over the Antarctic. The very complex vocabulary of polar governance I think should give us pause to resist any simple characterizations of China's Antarctic activity. At the same time, and this is what Nengye might want to elaborate on in the questions, China itself is an opaque and inward-looking system in which determining its motivations and its likely actions is very difficult. Beijing internationally suffers a trust deficit, mostly because of its militarization of the South China Sea. And this year, the demonstration of this very deep personal relationship between Party Chairman Xi Jinping and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And this raises many questions about where the world order is heading and what that means for the Antarctic specifically. At the same time, China is also a very big system, and central authority in Beijing is mediated by many layers of politics and organizational structure. We know that Antarctica arrived in the 14th five-year plan last year with a short and very broad paragraph about strengthening the protection and utilization of Antarctica. And there's a notable change from the 13th five-year plan, which is much more specific. But how those paragraphs are mobilized within the PRC system over the next 5 years will be the key question for Antarctic science and also for the international relations of Antarctica. There's also the question, I think, again, which Nengye alluded to, of how debates about China are mediated by our own institutional conditions in Australia and in Tasmania. So obviously we've had a very polarized debate about China. I've always hesitated to use this kind of language, but it is kind of useful to talk about pro-Beijing and anti-Beijing positions in our institutional settings. And neither of those positions makes any kind of sober assessment of Beijing's policies and actions very easy. So it's very easy to slip from a description to a proscription of the future of Antarctic governance when we're talking about China and the international system. And this introduces unexamined politics. There's a very long way to go, I think, in our settings here in Tasmania before we have the policy capacity to really work through all of that. So Nengye has reminded us that we need all of the tools available to us, and these include observing Arctic politics. I think it's easier in Australia to look at the Arctic objectively because there's a lot less sort of domestic political and emotional entanglements with it. And as a result, there's some useful sort of analytical mechanisms available to us from Australia when we examine the Arctic, which we can apply to thinking about the future of Antarctica. This is particularly the case in the era of the emerging era of great power competition, geopolitical rivalry, and as a final point, we can definitively say that the status quo, as it has been over some decades, won't continue. And so we need to think very robustly about what the future looks like. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent synopsis. So I'm going to open it up now for questions for Nengye, if anyone's got any questions. Well, I'm happy to go first if no one wants to. Nengye, you've outlined some of the key distinctions and similarities between the Arctic and the Antarctic. A fundamental one, which we have to remember, is the point you made right at the very beginning, is that the Arctic is actually water and the Antarctic is actually land, and that's led to a fundamental difference in the way that states relate to each other, how international law applies. And yet it's often said that maybe the Arctic should learn something from the Antarctic, and why isn't there an Arctic treaty? But now we're seeing that there are challenges even within the Antarctic Treaty, even though it's often cited as one of the world's most successful international regimes, despite its flaws. So I guess I'm wondering, given that there's similarities in terms of the issues which are dealt with, whether they're tourism, fishing, minerals, pollution, navigation, and so on, there's lots in common in terms of the technical issues that are dealt with, but maybe differences in terms of the legal and strategic issues that are dealt with. The Arctic's dealt with some of them well. Are there other regimes that the Antarctic treaty system can learn from to help it be more resilient as it moves into the future?
So you mean any other lesson Antarctica could learn from the Arctic? Is that your question? To be more resilient?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to say because, as you said, indeed, at one point, not long time ago, there has always been a call that for the Arctic to learn from Antarctica, to be more institutionalized, to have a treaty. But now things just has completely changed. I guess once again, I don't know the solution, but what I'm really worried at the moment is this very much confrontational camps between the Arctic 7 on the one hand and also Russia on the other hand. Because once this has been forged, then it will be difficult for them to reach any consensus anymore. So that's pretty much something I think we should be wary about here in Antarctica. And we already see some kind of this kind of let's call it behavior or ongoing dilemma in the Kamala when it comes to the MPA, Marine Protected Areas negotiations. So yeah, so that's just kind of my major concern. On the other hand, the Arctic governance, of course, is more robust before the Ukraine war. It's more robust and more diversified, as I said, because it's not a unique system. Because ATS is a very unique system. It's actually older than the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It was concluded in 1958. So it kind of instinctively carried this kind of uniqueness. That yeah, we are the Antarctica. Let's just keep other kind of global politics away. I think Arctic doesn't really have that luxury. So, but somehow over the years, yeah, they don't have a treaty, but they did manage this multi-level governance very well. So, which means now it's still. I think this is also an opportunity for the Arctic as well. It's like yeah, now the Arctic Council is kind of paused, but the engagement may still go on other. In other forums, especially at kind of an international level, for example, the BBNJ. But of course, I can also tell you that when I was in the BBNJ IGC4 early this year, Russia was very lonely. So it's pretty much like you have all these different political groups, Africa group, Pacific Island group. You have the European Union, you have China and Group of 77, you have US and all this, and then Russia. So I think, but that's kind of like I mean the consequence of the Ukraine war. So, but the thing is, at least the discussions are still going on in those kind of a multilateral international forum, which could have a implication or even implementation in the Arctic. When it comes to Antarctica, we only have ATS, and we won't hold it forever. But other forums seems to be not that robust to discuss the issues when in this part of the world. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcus.
I'll take the opportunity to having the microphone in my hand to ask a question. To me, the key issue with looking at the Arctic is the lessons of the securitization. The Arctic has always been securitized. In fact, the Antarctic Treaty was developed to avoid a situation of the Arctic where you had standing armies and militarization and, of course, first strike capabilities of this. So I think one of the key challenges is to ensure that we concentrate on security in the Antarctic and Southern Ocean, but not securitizing to the point where we end up with a system that, in fact, implodes. So my question is, in a sense, how do we ensure that the Antarctic Treaty remains without this element of implosion? And taking your point that, in a sense, with the Canada is looking to join the, to become a consultative party, all the actors are the same. That we have in the, most of the Arctic 8 are also engaged in Antarctica in many ways. So for me, the key is to learn from this, and in a sense, the question is, how do we avoid securitizing Antarctica but maintaining security?
Yeah, Marcus, I mean, you have asked a question that is exactly very much to the point, which I can't answer, but that's kind of what I would like to remind people as well, is like, yeah, of course, there should be a security lens. I mean, I have no doubt about it. Every country has its security concerns, but then how to make sure that that won't just becomes dominant about everything. So like my very initial kind of thoughts on that balance. Yeah, that's a very difficult balance. That's a very difficult balance. We have seen that over the past 7 years between the Australia-China relations. I have experienced, I have seen this. Every day you see the news from both countries going on and on and on and on. Everything becomes so securitized, from tourism to higher education to foreign investment, everything. So I guess at the end of the day, at this point, my initial kind of thoughts are, bear that in mind, but don't stop talking. That's kind of pretty much what I would like to offer. And that's actually what I'm doing before I leave this country. Is next week we are going to have this 2 days Australia-China joint workshop on biodiversity law and governance, funded by DFAT, on this kind of addressing. So what I call the meaningful and substantial dialogue and engagement to address shared concerns. So you don't need to discuss about everything. I mean, countries, there are many dimensions for bilateral relations. So you don't need to discuss with anything, like for example, military relations. Well, you don't need to discuss about that. Well, you can keep that in mind. But then there are questions and issues that face all countries, like climate change, like the mass extinction. Then the thing is, when it comes to this kind of issues, then it's better to talk. Even though you talk different language, but still, gradually you will understand each other. But if you just say, I have a security concern in mind, and then when you see a Chinese face and just stop talking, that is actually not helpful for our security. That's kind of what I'm trying to do something. I mean, at this point, but I don't know whether that will be successful or not.
Thank you. The next question was Russ at the back, and then we move over here.
I'd like to come back to your initial opening about the rule of law. And in a sense, correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to suggest that in a way it was somewhat arbitrary in terms of whose rules were they, and so on and so on. I'd actually like to make the link between international law and national laws. And as flawed as some of the players are, Australia, the US, Britain, and so on, the legal national systems are open to robust scrutiny, are transparent, the penalties for breaking the law are understood and can be challenged. And so those attitudes are brought into any consideration of international law. The other players, such as Russia and China, have legal systems which are opaque, not transparent. Their penalty systems are arbitrary. The capacity for challenge to those systems are very difficult. So I can't help but think that those same sort of attitudes are being brought to international law. So you really do have, in my view, a substantial conflict between those systems which are opaque and those systems which are transparent. So I actually disagree with you in terms of you saying the rule of law is arbitrary, because I think you really have a very big difference in terms of the players.
Yes, thank you so much for your question, because I have encountered with this question many times over the years in the coffee break or like in conferences. And I can tell you, I mean, that is not necessarily a wrong perception that, yes, we have good systems, they have better systems. How can they guarantee that, oh, they will just bring their better system to the international system? But let's take this point, that is international law. When we are making international law, it is not about good guys and bad guys. And who is there to determine who is a good guy and a bad guy? Because according to law, even domestic law, everyone in front of the law is equal. And this is the same principle of international law. That is, every country, no matter you are big or small, you are democracy or dictatorship, you are equal. So when it comes to the international lawmaking, we should really sit together, everyone, every country, they represent each other, and then talk to each other, and then reach consensus that they agree. Because also consent is the fundamental principle of contemporary international law. So everybody needs to agree upon a rule. So that's where the order comes in. Because if you are powerful and then you just force others to follow your rules, take it or leave it. If you don't take it, you are a bad guy. So I think the starting point is wrong. That I'm a good guy, you're a bad guy. That is a wrong starting point to begin with when it comes to the international law making. I'm not talking about domestic law, because domestic law, different countries have different systems. I have no problem of saying that, you know, there are many kind of immature or like very different legal system in China. Well, I teach that. So that's I agree with that point. But I totally reject the point that someone are good guys, someone are bad guys when it comes to the international law making. That's the making, to make international law.
My name's Maria Riedel. Just a point, we've also got problems in Australia in terms of Witness K and Bernard Colliery and Julian Assange, so we're not perfect. But just a question to you, would the change of leadership and policy in Russia and China make a difference to polar regions, for example, their treatment, and would, like it has in USA and in Australia in terms of Mr. Trump and Mr. Morrison, the policies are changing and the way that people are dealing with it. So in Russia and China, if we had a change of leadership, yeah, wouldn't we have a change in policy, a more gentler
thank you.
And constructive?
Yeah, I understand you perfectly. You know, sometimes naively, I also think that way. I'm not saying you are naive. I'm thinking myself. You know, naively, I also wish that way. That you just have a leadership change, everything is solved. You know, But once again, I look into this Law of the Sea negotiation from 1973 to 1982. It's so much educational for me about this word, because it happened before I was born. So that's why it is so educational. Now, you know, yes. I mean, in the 1973, when the Law of the Sea negotiation began, China was under Mao's leadership. And then in 1976, Mao passed away, and then started Open Door. But if you see the negotiation, so China was very much, in those days, China's position was like they are very much against hegemony, the superpowers, US and Russia, US and Soviet Union. But when it comes to their wording, they were pretty much just after Soviet. They were after Soviet because they had a very high tension with Soviet in the 1960s. And then that's why the US and China became close in 1972. So, you know, so that's actually, so yes, you see, Mao passed away in 1976, and the US-China relations becomes normalized in 1979 under the Carter administration. But what really drives the country's behavior is, that's kind of what I learned from this. It's like, yeah, it's changed. Of course, it will help. I'm not saying that it's not helpful. It will help because you have different people, different mentality, different worldview. But what is behind? That's also kind of my hope when Biden was elected, you know, and it did help. I totally agree with that. It did help, but not fundamentally, because there is something going on behind. It's not just the people's mind, but also this changed order. And what is that changed order? Is that China indeed became more powerful and more assertive. So even with the new government in Australia or in US, I think it will be helpful to better manage, but not necessarily just fundamentally kind of revert it. That's kind of what I learned from the 9 years negotiation of the Law of the Sea Convention before I was born, when I was diving into all those archives.
Back to Antarctica and what I would see as emerging tensions there among involved nations, sort of saying, let's talk and try to reach a consensus and so on, is hard to disagree with. It's a sort of apple pie and motherhood type statement. and certainly worth pursuing. Now, focus on China and China's participation in that. What would you see as problems from the China side in them engaging in those negotiations? What are the attitudes, interests, whatever, that would make such a consensus hard to reach?
Thank you very much for this question. So in 2020, I think in September, I delivered a talk to pretty much the whole community of Chinese polar law and policy people, academics, officials. It's a virtual seminar. I was in Sydney. I didn't really have a face-to-face engagement. So I think I have three critiques. The first thing first is there is a deep mistrust. There is deep mistrust, and this mistrust actually came from nowhere. So mistrust, I think mistrust are from both sides. But I think when you ask what they can do better from the Chinese side, how can they do better to engage with the ATCM? The first thing first is they came with a mistrust. I think that's the problem, because the best thing for them is the same: open up and talk, and engage, and then learn. And then they will also have a better view of the world. But the thing is, they have a very different view at home, and then they brought their view to the negotiation. So that's kind of the engagement that can definitely be improved. And the second thing is, China's engagement with the ATS has a fundamental problem, and I think that is lack of imagination. It has no imagination. I mean, I use the US as an example because the adoption of the Antarctic Treaty is an American invention, of course, in compromise with Russia, with Soviet. So that is quite a bit of imagination there in those days. But I think when it comes to China's engagement with the Antarctic Treaty System, there is a lack of imagination. It is really just very narrow national interest focused: fisheries, shipping, mining, whatever. So it's all about national interest. So I call it kind of a pre-industrialized society kind of imagination. You just want to get a little bit more, you know. So I think that's the second problem. And the third problem is, yes, there are high-flying words that China is going to provide a different system or whatever. But that is also interconnected with the lack of imagination. There is no alternative. So when they engage with the ATS, they don't really come with an alternative plan. There is no alternative plan. It is pretty much just come and see, and then what you can take. So that's kind of the approach. I think these three interconnected problems actually also are very much kind of a hindrance with China's better engagement with the ATS. But luckily, what I also sensed is the foundation of China's engagement has not changed. So they engage with ATS with the recognition of the ATS objectives. Because otherwise, why you come? Like you can just walk away or do whatever you want. I think they still recognize the foundation of ATS, but the way they engage with ATS can be far more better. But that's not for me to solve the problem. I think I can just provide my critiques.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. Just one last one, Nengye. Just to pick up on one of your comments about, I think it was China and Russia in CAMLA. You made the comment that they'd been excluded in the past. There was exclusion going on. I was just interested to see whether you could just unpack that a little, because I guess most of the commentary we read about CAMLA is that it's China and Russia doing the blocking rather than being excluded.
Oh yes. I guess it's a kind of I would call it interaction, because when this CAMLA MPA proposal was were first on the table, that was the 2012-2013 time. I think that was the first time that China openly said no. I think at that time, I can be wrong, because I mean we have people here who have been attending those meetings for years. But my kind of impression is like that was the first time when China started saying no in the Antarctic Treaty System, because before they were just a follower, just quietly attending all the meetings, smiling, shaking hands, and then whatever other delegations propose, they just accept and then take home and go home, and good trip to Hobart. But I think that's when the time when they started saying no. But I think when they start, so here comes also the interesting rules and based on all the things. When they start saying no, people are not prepared. And then when you see they say, when you see they start saying no, and then the actual reaction was like a bit distant, and the kind of reaction is a bit distant, or being a bit kind of a being kind of like a more isolating. So that's just the beginning. So what I'm trying to say is it's an interaction. So they become more and more assertive of saying no, while the reaction is also becoming more and more distant from them. So, and then at this point, I think now at this point, after all these years, it's been 10 years now, then the exclusion is almost like kind of like de facto. It's not, nobody calls it, it's not official, but they don't, when they come here for the conference, I think you can see that engagement is kind of a dying. Well, but it's not just Kamala, it's just a whole bilateral relationship. It's pretty much like this. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's not just like, oh, I don't want to engage with Chinese delegation. It's not like that, but it's kind of this interaction to widening the gap between China and maybe not just Australian delegation in issues such as Kamala. So that widening gap makes them, I think if I can understand well, it makes them feel more and more uncomfortable. And then, but that really enhanced the mistrust from both sides. So at this point, what we really need to do is kind of the re-engagement, restart talking. But then when you broke the relationship, to restart is actually more difficult. Yeah.
Thank you, Nengye. We need to draw that section of the program to a close, and we can follow up with further discussion at the end. So I'd like us to all just thank Nengye and Mark.